My name is Ben Ropp, and I'm a tech trainer here at the Advanced Learning Library of the Wichita Public Library, being assisted by Ken Warner, who's also a tech trainer here. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer that. You can interrupt at any time with that. Ken will direct my attention to new questions in the chat if I don't see them, or he may just answer them as he can in the chat. But don't be shy. And this is Microsoft Word Basics. And I'm going to post in the chat again a link to the materials for the class, which is in a Google Drive folder there. Going to go ahead and get started here. Actually, before we jump into this, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Word document. I'm going to create a new blank Word document. If you're following along, you can just do the same. So to start with the basics, what is Microsoft Word and what is it used for? Well, Microsoft Word is a word processor, which is designed for composing text, composing documents made up mostly of text, although you can incorporate all kinds of other elements such as graphics and pictures and charts and spreadsheets. You're able to import all kinds of things. We won't be covering that in the basics class today. So we'll be focusing on the ways in which we can manipulate text. I'm also talking about saving and printing a little bit. So to start with the very basics, I'm going to point out some of the elements of what we call the ribbon right now. All Microsoft Office programs have this bank of toolbars across the top, which we call the ribbon. It's a ribbon, and it's got all the little icons and little arrows that let us give us choices for the different commands there. And the ribbon's organized into tabs here across the top. The main tab is the Home tab. That's where it will always open up. And that's where we'll spend most of our time today. And the ribbon, each tab is organized into different groups. And so we have the font group here, which lets you change the appearance of the text. The paragraph group here. There's a clipboard group for cut and copy and paste. And then there's some other stuff. There's a styles group and an editing group. We'll stick with these main groups. Another tab that we'll be looking at later in the class is the File tab. And this shows us what we call the backstage view. And from this screen, you can get info about the document and create a new document, open an old document that you have saved somewhere. You can save and print and share and export and close. So this is what we call backstage. We'll be coming back here to when we talk about saving and printing. So a couple of the other tabs that we'll be using is the layout tab. We'll talk a little bit about margins, but this is where you set up everything in terms of the page size, the orientation, whether it's landscape or portrait, the size of the paper you're working with, if you want to make columns or insert page breaks, that stuff's here. But we'll be talking about margins particularly in this class. Another tab that we will briefly go to is the review tab, which has the spelling and grammar check, also known as the spell checker. But mostly we're going to be on the home tab. So when I talk about the tabs, you'll look up here at the top here and look for the groups first, and then you can look. And notice as you mouse over the different commands on the ribbon, Word very helpfully has a little pop-up window that tells you what that icon does, what that icon is the command for, and what its name is, and what it does. And so that's really great. You can just kind of poke around and learn a lot about what buttons do what just by mousing over those. So to start with, if you're going along, I'm just gonna pretend I'm a 2-year-old and play on the keyboard and just create a bunch of lines of text and just gibberish. And put some other stuff in there. So we got a bunch of text to just play with, and we don't care what it says. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the cursor. Notice that there's this flashing vertical line that we call the cursor. And that's where, if I start typing, that's where the text appears, wherever that cursor is. And I can move the cursor around by clicking in other places. So if I click up here, you can see it's going to blink there, and that's where the new text is going to go. Same with this line here. I can tab over, and you can see it blinking, and I add text, and it adds the text wherever that blinking cursor is. And if I click somewhere, let's say if I click at the beyond the point where there isn't any text, it will place the cursor at the farthest point down right there. So I clicked way down here, but the cursor showed up here because that's where the last text appeared. There's nothing else on the page. So that's the cursor. I can also use the arrow buttons on my keyboard. They're between the number pad and your regular keyboard to the right of your keyboard. There's the 4 arrows going up, down, left, and right. And I can move my cursor around with using those arrow buttons. You see my cursor there, it's moving around, jumping, and then going up and down, and I'll bring it down to the bottom. If I go to the right here, it doesn't do anything because there's no text there. And let's see, we can add a bunch of blank spaces here, and then I can move it through. So the arrow buttons, as well as the mouse, let me reposition the cursor and I can place it in this blank space because I added a bunch of blank spaces there. Up here, there's no blank spaces. It just stops at that point, so it jumps to the end of the line. Enter is the button that if I place the mouse in the middle of this line and hit the enter button, it creates a new paragraph. It calls it a paragraph, and one of the things that it does with paragraphs is add a little bit of space before and after the paragraph so you can separate it. You can see there's a little bit, these 2 lines are closer together than these 2 lines. There's some space between, and that's because it was a new paragraph. And if I keep hitting enter again and again, technically it's adding paragraphs, but practically it's just adding more blank space on the page. And then the backspace is really useful. It's in the top right corner of the main keyboard, and that just goes backwards. It deletes items to the left of the cursor. So if I position it here in the middle of this line and hit the backspace, it starts deleting those keys, everything that's to the left of that cursor. That's the backspace. And I can use backspace to delete the paragraph hits that I did for these lines. If I go to the beginning of this line and hit the backspace, it will delete those lines. I can hit enter again to bring them back and hit backspace to delete them. And I can backspace as far as I like. So the next thing that it's useful to know, and this is pretty basic, so if you're familiar with all of this stuff, just bear with me. We're treating, this is a basics class. I can use my mouse to highlight text. So what I'm doing is I'm going to click and hold the left mouse button and drag the mouse to the left, and then I let go, and I've got some text that's highlighted. Now we'll talk about how if you want to change some text, you have to highlight and tell the computer which text you want to change. So for instance, I highlighted this text, I can click the bold button and it makes it bold, but it's only affecting that text that I highlighted. So selecting text with the mouse is going to be a really useful thing. I can select as much or as little as I want. Here I've selected everything, except actually if you look in the corner, I missed the first X. If I start from the bottom and drag up, it's going to select everything in between those spots. So that's all of my text. And I can, and I'll talk a little bit more about selecting later. The last thing about the keyboard commands is if I hold down the shift button, it writes in capitals. And here my text is also still highlighted because it was highlighted up here, and I hit enter. And let me turn the bold off, or highlight, I meant bold. The bold's off now, and I'm just typing. If I hold down the shift key, it capitalizes everything. Also, I've got numbers up along the top. If I hold down the shift and hit the numbers, I get the gobbledygook that is used in cartoons to represent cursing. That can be fun, but that's how you get all of those characters, by holding down your shift button. Okay. So now I'm going to open the sample recipe document that we have. I'm closing this one. It says, do you want to save changes to your document? I don't want to save them, so I'll just close it. So we've gotten the use out of that. And there is a PowerPoint for this class, but I think it'll be easier for me to just talk through everything. I'll show you a little bit of the PowerPoint here. Labeling all the parts of the document and the page and the ribbon. And so let's go ahead and open the basics example recipe, which you can download from the Google Drive folder. And let's see. I'll just maximize that and jump right in. So the first thing we're going to do is, and I'm magnifying this a little bit so you can see it good. Notice in this lower right corner, there is a zoom scroller that lets me zoom in. Right now it's at 140%. If I can, there's a minus and a plus on either end. I can do that to zoom in or out. This is 100%. I'm zooming in to 130% so you can see it. I've also enlarged my cursor on this computer so that you can see it better. So to start with, we're gonna insert some paragraphs to clean up this text. This is all the text that's needed for this recipe for a caprese salad. And it's just a little bit out of order and it's got some mistakes on it. And we're just gonna clean it up and fix it. So to start with, I'm gonna click after this first part is my title, and I'm gonna add a paragraph or a line break here. So I'm clicking next the end of the word salad, and then I'm going to tap enter. And now I've got my title separated at the top there. Now I'm going to remove, there's some space here to the left of this where it says time needed, and I want to delete that. So I'm going to click to the left of that word time and use my backspace. And there was only a tab there, so I just had to hit it once. But you know, if it was individual spaces, I might have had to hit it multiple times, but now it's all lined up good. That looks good. This ingredients is like a heading, and I want to put that on its own line. So I'm going to click next to the left of the word ingredients. And to create a line, I'm going to hit which button? The enter button. Going to hit enter. Now I've got that on its own line, and that looks good. Now, let's see, I've got another heading, which is directions. I've got it here twice. So I'm gonna, on the first instance of it, I'm gonna click to the end of it, and I can click pretty much anywhere on this line, and it's gonna place the cursor at the end of that word because there's no other text. It's gonna just jump to the end of that text. So I'm gonna click about right here, and there I've got, I'm at the end of that, all the text on that line. So I make sure I kind of clicked way over here in case there was some extra space there or something, so I can delete everything. So I'm using the backspace to clear that word out, and I'm gonna leave that line there. So this is starting to look a little better, a little more organized. So we have a spot for our ingredients and we have a spot for our directions. Those elements are all on the page. They're just down lower on the page. So we're going to use some basic copy and paste tools now to move these ingredients up to the ingredients section here, now that we've got that set up. Actually, before we do that, though, I'm going to scroll all the way down. And right now I'm using the middle button on my mouse is a roller button. And that is the easiest way nowadays to scroll through a document. But I also have over here what's called the scroll bar, and I can click and drag that up and down. I can also click the little arrows at either end, top and bottom, to move up or down. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and this says it's updated in 2018. I'm going to click to to the right of the date here in backspace, clear that old date out, and I'm going to type in today's date. But notice something that happens when I type the word June and then hit the space bar. Excel jumps up with this little thing. It says June 10th, 2021. Press enter to insert. That's today's date. After I typed out the current month and added a space after it, Microsoft said, hey, I think you're typing, you might be typing today's date. Let's just add it automatically because I'm a computer and I can just check the computer clock and put in the insert today's date. So I just have to hit enter and it adds today's date without my having to type it out. Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office generally is all about giving us shortcuts and doing the work for us. So we want to have to try to do as little as possible so that we can utilize all the tools that are built into Microsoft Office and Word specifically for today. So now we've got our date updated. I'm going to scroll back up using my scroller button. And the next, we're going to talk about copy and paste. I'm just going to scroll down here so I can see my ingredients below the picture here. This is my list of ingredients, but I want to put them up here below the heading here that says ingredients. So for the purposes of the class, I'm going to do this the long way. It would be pretty easy to move all of these all at once, but for practice, I'm going to move each one at a time. First, I'm highlighting this text, clicking and dragging, and then I'm going to right click with the mouse over my highlight. I'm going to right click on the mouse and come up to the copy command and left click on that. When I say click, I always mean left click. If I want you to right click, I will say right click. If I just say click, always assume that it's a left click. So let's do this. I want to start again. I'm going to right click on my selection, this first ingredient, and then I'm going to click on copy. That is a left click. And then I'm going to come up here to right up below the ingredients. I'm going to click there, meaning a left click. And now I'm going to right click and click on the paste. Now paste has three options here. I'm just going to click on the first one to keep it simple. And now it's copied that text up here. I could use cut and paste to delete it out of here and bring it up here, but I want to kind of do it the long way so you can see exactly how it works and how it happens. So I'm going to just jump over to my PowerPoint to show you some more about cut and paste. So there's three ways to do things in Microsoft Office programs. One is to use the toolbar or the ribbon. The ribbon lives on the toolbar. All the icons along the ribbon, that's the one way that we can do things. Another option is to right click. If I right click, Windows always gives me a selection of options to do with whatever I'm right clicking on. And Microsoft Office is like that. So for copy and paste and cut, I can always right click to copy. That gives me those options. And then there's also, I'm going to talk a little bit about keyboard shortcuts. I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts because if I'm in the middle of typing and I need to do something with the mouse, then I have to move my hand over to the mouse and click and drag and do whatever. and then I have to come back to the keyboard. But if I can do the same command from the keyboard, then I can save a little time. And that's what a keyboard shortcut is. So with that in mind, I'm going to come down and talk about the clipboard on the ribbon, which is where the cut, copy, and paste commands are. And so, excuse me, if you look a little closer, you've got the little scissors, which is the cut command, and the two pieces of paper, which are identical, are supposed to be identical. That means copy. And then the paste has this clipboard with paper in front of it, which is the command for paste. So you get all of these commands when you right click on some text in Microsoft Word. You can get all of these. Also, the keyboard shortcut for cut is Control plus X. For copy, it's Control C. And for paste, it's Control V. And the C, Control Copy, makes the most sense. X is kind of like cutting, but also conveniently, X is right next to C. And they're both right in the lower left of the keyboard near the control button. So you can do those with one hand by holding down the control and then with your pinky or ring finger, and then tapping C or X or V, which is next to the C, with your index finger. So anyway, that's keyboard shortcuts. It's kind of advanced. If it's a little bit confusing, just ignore this part. The other thing I'll briefly cover is the paste options. So on the ribbon and the clipboard group, these little arrows all over the ribbon give you choices. It's sort of like a right click because it gives you a menu of choices. And when I click on that, you get these options for pasting. And we're not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to suggest you use the first one to keep it simple today. I will mention that technically this is what it calls keep source formatting. And then the one on the far right is keep text only. And this is useful if you're copying some text from a website into a Word document. I recommend using the keep text only. Otherwise, in general, if you're just within a document, you can just use keep source formatting. The difference is whether or not it pastes the formatting as well as the text. It's a question of whether the formatting comes with the text or not. But don't worry about it. If you're going to use the ribbon, you can just click on the clipboard part of this button and it will paste. It will do that first option. It will do the keep source formatting. All right, so that's a little in copy and paste and keyboard shortcuts. So that you can follow what I'm doing, I'm going to continue to copy and paste these ingredients using the right-click method. Right-click is always an option and it always gives you other options. So I'm right-clicking, left-clicking copy, left-click where I want to place it, right-click, clicking the first paste icon. So again, I highlight, right-click, copy, position my cursor, right-click, paste. Another time. This time I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut. I'll tell you what I'm doing. I've highlighted the text. I move my mouse away. I'm going to hold down the Control while I tap C. Now I'm going to click where I want to put it. Then I hold down the Control and I tap V. And V is only used, I think, because it's right next to the C, because you're going to copy. If you're going to copy, then you're going to paste. And so copy is easy to remember, Control C. The V is right next to it. That's how you'll paste. Let's see, I've got one more to copy and paste. We'll go back to the right click, copy, scroll up, position my cursor, right click, paste. Okay, that looks good. Now I can come down here and I can select all of this text that I've just copied. I don't need it down here. And I hit the backspace and that's looking good. Now I've got all our ingredients there. Now we can move the directions. Now this whole exercise is really an exercise, I could do this much quicker, but for the sake of teaching, I'm going to do these one at a time. So I'm going to move these. There's 3 sort of groups of directions, and these are actually separate paragraphs. So you may notice these lines are closer together than these lines. See, there's a space between these, but not between these. And that's because these are separate paragraphs. So I'm going to highlight this first set of directions. Right click, copy, position my cursor with the left click, right click again, and paste with the left click. Another way to highlight things in Word is, so there's a shortcut in Microsoft Office in a lot of different contexts that just involves double clicking. So if I click on this word here it's going to position the cursor right where I clicked. Now it's blinking there between the W and the E. If I double click that word, it highlights the whole word. So that's a shortcut. Instead of clicking and dragging the word, I can just double click on it and it highlights that word. Similarly, if I click in the margin here, a single click, you notice the cursor changes from this, what we call an I bar, which is used to select text. When I go to the margin, it changes back to the arrow, which is kind of the normal cursor. If I click in the margin next to a line, it highlights that line. If I double click in the margin next to a paragraph, it will highlight the whole paragraph. There, I just double clicked here, it highlighted the paragraph. That's the longest paragraph. Everything else, well, this is one too. So if I double click here, it doesn't change it. But this is a paragraph up here. If I double click, it selects the paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to double click to select this paragraph, which is the second of 3 directions. Right click, copy, left click, position the cursor, right click, paste. And the last one, I did it the long way, but I can just click over in the margin and it'll select that whole line, right click, copy. position the cursor, right click, paste. Now I can highlight this. Now notice it's easier to highlight a whole line at a time if I position the cursor in the margin and then drag it down. And I'm just going to backspace to clear that. So that's copy and paste. Now that's really useful in the keyboard shortcuts, especially in all kinds of contexts. If you're on the web, on the browser, you want to select some text and you want to email something, quote some text in an email, you can highlight it and use that Control-C to copy and can Control-V to paste into like a email or a text message. Well, not a text message. On a computer, you're going to be maybe a direct message if you're messaging somebody on Messenger or something like that. Next, we're going to talk about formatting font. So this is all just plain text. It's fine for the main text, but the title, for instance, we want to make that stand out more. So I'm going to select it. And I just clicked and drag because that's on a short one, it's easier, but I could also just click in the left margin there. Oh, before we start formatting our font, let's talk about what is a font. This is the font group in the ribbon, and in the top left of this corner, the main selection here, there's a drop-down menu. There's a gazillion fonts in Microsoft Word, and I don't know if you can see that behind it, but when I mouse through it, it changes that text to match whatever I've moused over. So a font, you could think of it as the handwriting of the computer. What is the font? What is the typeface is a term that they use. So let's update this to something fancy. I'm not familiar with this one. Cormorant Infant. What was it? Cormorant Infant Semi-Bold. That's kind of fancy looking. So that's one thing. Now we can also, let's see, make it bigger. So I guess I didn't specify the elements of a font. The font typeface is the shape of the letters, but it also involves the color, the size, and the thickness, and all of that type of thing, including stuff like bold and italic and underline. So the size is measured in points, and the default font is usually Calibri 11 point. I'm going to make this bigger. As I mouse over the different sizes, you can see them. It can get really big. I'm going to go about 24. Another option here, these two little A's next to the font size, one increases the font size to make it bigger. The little a decreases the font size. So I can just click that A and you can see the number getting bigger, but you can also see my text getting bigger. So I can just click that until it looks right. Let's go up. This is 28. So I can eyeball it this way too. You know, Office, again, there's several ways to do everything. I'm gonna select here, but I can just hit this big A until it looks good to me. I don't have to have a number in mind. If you know the number, then if you have a long document and you want to make everything the same or consistent, then that's the way to do it. knowing the number. There's other shortcuts for that too. So lastly, we can change the color maybe, and in the lower right part of the font group here, this red A, or the A with the red underline, is a mouse over it, says font color. The drop-down menu, it shows me some theme colors here in different shades. And then there's standard colors, and then there's a button for more colors, and you have all kinds of things. And then a gradient is combining two colors, but going gradually from one to the other. Let's just do a dark green. That looks good. And then lastly, I'm going to make it bold text. The bold really doesn't do anything in this font, because it's part of it. I guess it's a semi-bold already. Arial Black is another one that's sort of already bolded. But so this is bolded. If I shift to Arial, you can see that's the bold. Take the bold off. Now that you can see the difference. There's an ordinary Arial font, then bolded Arial font. But let's go back. You see one thing, there's this long menu of fonts, but the recently used fonts show up at the top. So I can go back to that one that I selected. And then, now that I'm thinking about it, I want to make that a little bigger. Because I can't really bold it more, but I can make it bigger. I'm just gonna jump, maybe not quite that big, 36, that looks good. So, you can just eyeball it with these buttons or mousing over the sizes. So the default font, notice when I click on the other font here, you can see up here what font that is. And this is the default for a Word document. When you open a new Word document, it's always going to be Calibri 11 point. And that's fine. So a lot of these options are going to be available to you in other contexts besides just Microsoft Word. So like whatever email program you're using, you probably have a lot of these options in terms of changing the font and the size and the color. Most email programs include those choices as well. So this can be useful outside of just Microsoft Word. And of course, other Microsoft Office programs include a font group. So even in Excel, you have a bunch of options like this, very similar. And so now, I haven't done this class on Zoom before. Normally, I would direct you to make some changes of your own and make 3 different changes in the rest of the text here. I'll just do some other options. Let's take these headings, ingredients and directions, and let's make those stand out a little better. We can use the same font, that Cormorant Infant Semi-Bold. It's kind of a weird name, but we'll make it big, not quite as big as the other one. That looks good. It happens to be 18 point. So I'll do the same thing to the directions. Change to the Cormorant and then bring it up to 18. And we might as well, we can change the colors of those too. Make them all green. And I'll go ahead and bold them too, although you can't really see much difference. Hardly any. But that looks good. Now I've got some consistency and my headings are highlighted using the font group on the ribbon. So at the time, we're doing okay. We got about halfway through. Next, I'm going to talk about formatting paragraphs. So we're going to use this paragraph group on the ribbon. So how many of you, and this is obviously a rhetorical question, have tried to center something on the page using this method? I'm just hitting the space bar until it moves over. That looks like it's centered. That's fine. That's perfect, right? Yeah, except if you had a lot of them to do, it would be kind of a pain. There's a much faster way to do it. One thing that I will mention here that I haven't before that's really important is the undo button. Above the ribbon in the top left corner here, there's what we call the quick access toolbar. And this is something that you can customize, but by default, whenever you open Word, the three buttons here are the save icon. That's a floppy disk, if you've ever heard of that. It stands for save. Then there's an arrow pointing to the left. That's the undo. I'm going to use that now, and notice it undid all the entry. It just undid them all at once. If you're typing, sometimes it'll undo one letter at a time. But this was all spaces, so it just did them all at once. Now there's a redo button. There wasn't the redo button. Since I undid something, now I can redo it. Redoing also can repeat an action that you did previously. It's the opposite of the undo, the redo. So anyway, I'm going to highlight my heading to make sure that there's no mistake. And then I'm going to use the center button. So these four buttons here control how the alignment controls how the text is aligned on the page. The default is align left. That's standard for English. We read left to right, so we start on the left. That makes sense. The next one over is the center. And I just click that button, it centers it perfectly. I'm kind of a perfectionist sometimes, so if I'm making a resume and I want my name to be centered at the top, I know this will be very precise and center it perfectly. I don't have to get out my ruler and start hitting the space bar. I can just click that button. Another option, which we won't be able to see really, except maybe for this paragraph here, is the justify, which means the same, and actually it's not showing any difference at all. Oh, it's funny, it did before when I was doing this. Justify makes it stretch, the text stretch, so that it has a flat margin on the left and right, kind of like in a newspaper. But we don't have enough text to even demonstrate that here. That's okay. But that's what justify means. It means it's going to square the margins on the left and the right. And then of course the aligned right would be if I'm writing a business letter and wanted the date to be at the right at the top. Might be an example of when using the align right. So that's alignment. And let's see, the next is the paragraph spacing. So Microsoft Word does some weird things with paragraphs. And I mentioned this earlier. Notice down here, it's kind of subtle, but there's the difference between these two lines here is smaller than between these two lines. So you can see there's more space, and that's because it's a paragraph. When I highlight it, you can see there's some extra space below that's highlighted. That's some extra space after the paragraph. Now, that's why these ingredients are kind of spread out, but I want them to be close together so that in the paragraph group here, there is a line spacing button. It says line and paragraph spacing. Choose how much space appears between lines of text or between paragraphs. So I'm going to click the drop-down menu, and I have numbers here: single spaced, 1.15 spacing, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Those are the defaults. And then there's this options button, which gives me even more options. If I click that, it gives me a pop-up button with the paragraph. We call this a dialog box. And you can see in the spacing group down here, there's a before and after, and I've got 8 points of space after the paragraph. So I can go here and just zero that out and click OK, and that takes care of it. I'm going to undo that and show you a different way to do that. I can select my text that I want to change the spacing for, click the drop-down menu for line spacing. Notice down at the bottom, it has add or remove space before and after paragraph. So I could add space before the paragraph, or I could remove the space after the paragraph. There's two options, and these just toggle on and off. I'm going to remove the space. Now when I mouse over it, it says add. The options are both add, so it's like a toggle switch. Now they're nicely single spaced, and it looks much better for a recipe. They're not actually paragraphs, so it works better without the paragraph spacing here. And that's the weird thing that Excel does, Microsoft Word does, that you can keep an eye out for. But I can always go into the line spacing options and get really detailed control over this. Notice that the line spacing here is actually a little bit more than single spaced. It's 1.08. So it's just a little bit extra space so that it's a little more readable, I think. So that's the line spacing. We can do the same thing with our directions. I can notice there's the option to add space before the paragraph or remove space after the paragraph. And it shows me those options as I mouse them over. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the space. That makes it actually harder to read, to separate, but we're going to fix that in the next section. All right, this is taking a little longer than I thought, but I hope it's been helpful. We're not done yet. I'm just noticing the time, but we're doing good. So the next part, I'm going to talk about bullets. Bullets are a way of calling out lists in a document. You may have seen bullets in resumes or recipes or in statistics like listings in sports or something. There's two kinds of bullets in effect. well, there are actually different types of lists, highlighting lists, and there's bullets, and then there's numbers. So, and so with most of the buttons on the ribbon, you know, if when I mouse over it, it tells me what it is. So in the top left corner of the paragraph group, there's the bullets button. And there's also a drop-down menu. So I can just click that to create bullets. So let's add bullets to our list of ingredients. First, I'm going to highlight my text. Notice I'm just clicking from one corner to the opposite corner while holding down the mouse button, and I let go. And I get these options here. It kind of gives a pop-up version of this stuff when I first do it. But I'm gonna just use the ribbon here and click the bullets. So now I've got nicely bulleted. It makes it easier to read a list. Bullets, that's why really effective in a resume. If you have like a skills list, it makes it easier for whoever's reading it to kind of take it in. It organizes your information. You can see at a glance that there's a list of 5 ingredients there, and I can kind of scan through and get a sense of what they are without having to strain myself to figure out what's going on. It separates it from the rest of the document. With the drop down, there's a different types of bullets available. I'm just going to stick with the basic. You can also incidentally upload your own icons for lists. I think there's a way to do that anyway. So that's the ingredients. Now, the other kind of list that can get called out in a document is the numbered list. And that's the same as, it works the same as bullets, except that it assigns numbers or letters. So it's like 1, 2, 3 or ABC. And we'll use that. So the difference is bullets are used for things that are not in any particular order. So like if you're talking about your skills on a resume, you're not saying this is my number 1 skill and then there's this one. It's like they're all skills and they're kind of equal. You're just listing them all. And so ingredients are like that. And so it doesn't really matter what order they're in this part of the recipe. Now directions, on the other hand, I could use bullets and it would still make sense because they are in order, but it organizes them a little more if I use numbers. So I'm going to click the numbers, the numbered list button. Well, it's called numbering. And the dropdown for that gives me some different options for the numbered list. I can use periods, I can use commas, parentheses. I can use Roman numerals, I can use letters, capital letters for ABC or lowercase with, anyway, you see there's lots of options, uppercase and lowercase Roman numerals. We'll stick with the default with periods. Now I've got my directions very neatly organized, numbered 1, 2, and 3. Step 1, slice the tomato. It's very clear. It's easy to, if I have to look away and come back to the recipe to double check it, I can remember where I'm at on the directions. I need to know the order of things. So a numbered list is very appropriate for that. Okay, so actually we're doing just fine for time. Our recipe is actually looking almost complete now. Now you may notice some things, and if you're like me, it's probably been bothering you this whole time that we've got a misspelled word up here that has a red squiggly line below. Now that is Microsoft Word's automatic spell checker at work. So if I have a short document, I can just read through, and this is usually on by default. It is actually something that you can turn off in the settings in the behind the scenes under options. But here, the spell check is obviously one of the great services that computers can render for us, doing some work for us. We don't need to learn how to spell as well in the age of computers, because the computer will tell us when we've misspelled a word, and it will even tell us how to correct it. So if Word thinks the word is misspelled, it will put this red squiggly line under it. If I right click on that, Excel gives me its suggestion for correction. And in this case, the word wonderful without a W is, of course, the misspelled word. And I can just click on the correction to replace it. And now the red squiggly line is magically gone and my spelling is correct. So if I come over here and misspell tomatoes on purpose and then click outside of it, it immediately flags it and says, wait a minute, you've misspelled tomatoes. I'm going to right click, and notice here, it doesn't know for sure what I meant. So it gives me several different options. Was it a possessive, the tomato's color, or the tomato's skin? Word doesn't really know, so it gives me both options. So I can pick my choice there and just click on it to change it. Similarly, down here we have a blue squiggle line under two words, and what this is a grammar check. Not only does Word correct our spelling, but it will correct our grammar. And in this case, if I right click on it, it may not be clear what it's correcting, but what it is there's an extra space in between the words. So the correction here just replaces the double space with the single space. So that, as I said, is really good for short documents. And most of your email programs include a spell check as well, and they work similarly. I noticed, I think some of them it's a left click instead of a right click to view the corrections or the suggestions for the correction. If you have a longer document, I am going to show you, I'm going to use my undo to put those changes back. I'm going to misspell some extra things, maybe put an extra space elsewhere. So now I've got, let's see, I've got like a bunch of corrections to make, and let's pretend this is a longer document. There's another way to go through the document all at once. Like if I was writing a term paper for a class I was taking, and it would say it was 10 pages, I could just go through, but there's an easier way. If I go over to the review tab, there's a spelling and grammar check. And when I click that, it takes me one by one. It opens this panel on the right and flags the first connection it comes to. Now my cursor was down below here, so it started where the cursor was. That's why I didn't stop at the top. Let me start again. If I click at the top of the document and then click the spelling and grammar, it will now start at the top because that's where my cursor was. So I've got the suggested correction here, and then I can ignore it, ignore all. If it appeared more than once in the document and it was misspelled every time, I could ignore all and say, it's like, no, you're wrong, Microsoft. I'm right this time. But no, that's the, they're correct in this time, so I'm going to click change to change it. Notice there's an add button, and what this is it will add it to the dictionary that Microsoft is using for this. So a lot of times you find the spell checker will flag proper names. So your own last name might be flagged in a document as misspelled, but if you're on your own computer, then it's useful to add that to the dictionary that the spell checker is using. I'm going to go ahead and change that. So now I have a grammar check. I put an extra space there. I can change that. Next one is where it says to taste. That also had an extra space. Of course, the ignore button is there because they're not always right, but they are in this case, so I'll click change. So that's, and then you give this fancy, nice little pop-up that says spelling and grammar check is complete. And click OK to clear that. So that is the spell checker. Now let's say we're going to get ready to print this, and you might want to adjust your margins. So for that, we need to go to the Design tab on the ribbon. No, I'm sorry, it's Layout. I get those mixed up. It used to be called Page Layout. Now they just say Layout. And and we're just going to look at margins because we're starting to run out of time. So again, if I click the margins button, the drop down is the equivalent of the button. There's no separate option for just clicking the button. It gives me the drop down no matter where I click on that particular icon. And the normal margins, the default margins for Microsoft Word and in general is 1-inch margins on top, bottom, left, and right. There's some preset margins here. I can do narrow margins, which is a 1/2 inch all around. I just click that, and now you can see I've got just a 1/2 inch margin left and right. You can't so much tell at the bottom because it's not a full page of document, but you can see here the left margin. I don't necessarily need narrow margins for this document, but one thing that this can be useful for is if you are doing a resume, and 1-page resumes are preferable to 2-page resumes unless in most circumstances, but not all. And one way to fit more on the page is to narrow the margins like this. And so it's still professional looking, but I can fit more text. There's also a moderate, which is in between that, which is 1 inch top and bottom, but 3/4 of an inch on the left and right. I like that. I like that one. It gives you a little more space, but it looks very respectable. It's almost indistinguishable from the 1-inch margin if you're not looking out for it. And of course, you have a custom margins down here at the bottom, which brings a pop-up, the page setup dialog, and I can put in decimal numbers in inches of how much space I want on every margin, top, bottom, left, and right. The gutter position is has to do with the footers, I believe. So anyway, that's fine. We'll just keep that as it is. And next, I'm going to talk a little about saving. So one thing, to save the document, I can just click on the save icon here in the quick access toolbar. But I'm going to talk about some of the options that show up in the file tab here. And this is also where I could print. But notice there's a save and there's a save as. What's the difference? So save as is for new documents or when you want to save an additional copy of a document. So because what save as does is it gives you the option to select where the document is saved and what name it's given. And you can even change the file type that you save it under with save as. Whereas save will simply save the document with the same current name and the same current location that it came from. So if you've previously saved a document, then you can just click save and it will save the new changes. But save as will bring up this dialog box. Save as, and it's saying, where do you want to save it? First of all, I've got highlighted this PC. I could save it. We use OneDrive here at the city in the library. But I'm going to browse a location on this PC. I can also double click on this PC. I'm going to go ahead and click browse. Now I have my pop-up window that's the save as dialog box, which shows me this PC and all of the different folders that are on my PC. My current folder is download because I downloaded this document onto this computer for the purpose of this presentation. So here I can select a name. Let's see, I'm going to put it in the documents folder. I can select a location, that is, and I can change the name here. So I can say basics recipe copy, or I could say, you know, a really good convention to use when you're naming documents and organizing them on your own computer is to add a date, especially, or in the case in which you might have multiple versions of a document. So you can't use slash marks in a file name. So I would use a dash and say, I could just say 6/10/21, and that will help me organize my files better. And I'm going to click save. Now I've noticed the document title at the top here is changed, and it's now saved in my documents folder. So if I make a little minor change, I can just click the save icon here on the toolbar, or just go file save here. And you won't see anything change. It's just saving the most recent changes that I've done. Okay, the last thing we'll talk about briefly is printing. So when I go to file, I select print, and I get a preview of my document. The preview didn't used to be automatic. There used to be a separate print preview button or command, and but now they always show you a preview. And in the left sidebar, I've got control over different aspects of the document for printing purposes. I can change the number of copies here. I can select different printers if I have more than one. Another option that's always available, which can be useful, is print to PDF. That's one way to convert it to a PDF, is to print to PDF. Or you can save it in OneNote, which is a kind of cloud computing. I can select separate pages. If I don't want to print all the pages, I can put page numbers here. And you also have control over different page setup options here that are all I won't go into in detail, but there is a link to page setup. And when I click that, it gives me that same page setup dialog box that we saw when we were changing the margins. And I can change the size of the paper depending on my capabilities of my printer. I can also change the layout. And there's things like the portrait and landscape. I can change those layout options here too. So that's printing. And if I had more than one document, more than one page, I could flip through those here at the bottom. It has the little arrows to go forward and back if I have multiple pages. Okay, so our document looks good. The last thing I want to mention is, you go back to this PowerPoint, and I will upload, I forgot to do it, but I will upload a version of this PowerPoint to that same Google Drive folder, so that you can look at it at your leisure. I talk about some of the different toolbars. The insert tab we didn't talk about, but that's where you can add a page break or insert pictures. I can also put in page numbers in my headers and footers there. But I wanted to get to some other resources that are available to you. And that is GCF Learn Free is an excellent tutorial website that's free and ad-free, I should mention. It's GCF stands for Goodwill Community Foundation. I'm going to go ahead and click through to show you that. And it used to be gcflearnfree.org. They have a different URL, but it still redirects there. If you go over to all topics here, then you can see there's a ton of things, of tutorials available, and they have versions of Word here. I recommend just using the basic version unless you have one of these older versions. And most of the things since about 2010 are pretty similar. I think 2010 was where they introduced the ribbon. But just looking at the Word document, and I will let you know, so it's arranged in lessons here, and I didn't mention, which I can add here. So if I just click through on one of them, there's text that I can scroll through, and it has nice little screenshots. You can read through it. There's also a video for most of the lessons, and these are also available on YouTube, which is another resource that I'll mention. So if I can play this document, and it goes through, and I can view it on YouTube, jump in. So it gives you a nice, really well done tutorials on Microsoft Word and all of Microsoft Office and lots of other topics. It's a really great resource. If you're interested in, oops, let's see what I was going to put in the if you want to review what we covered here today in the GCF Learn Free, these are the lessons that you can look at. So I will include that. That's a little Microsoft editing and helping me edit. So those are the lessons that covered stuff that we covered today in GCF Learn Free. This lesson plan itself was from the Denver Public Library. I would be remiss not to thank them for that. I would also recommend, if you get stuck on a particular topic using Microsoft Word, you can go to YouTube and search for Microsoft Word, and let's say line spacing. If you get stuck on something, there are a ton of videos, and a lot of them are very professionally done. Some of them are not professionally done, but can still be useful. YouTube is a tremendous resource. There's a lot of ways to waste your time there, but there's also a ton of information if you're willing to look for it. There's the GCF Learn Free is in here as well. And those are all, you can get a full list of them on YouTube. Ken, I believe, just posted a link in the chat for the survey for the class. We would appreciate you filling that out. In the PowerPoint here, I have a list of the most useful keyboard shortcuts, in my opinion. Control Z is your undo. Whenever you make a mistake, which is inevitable, then the Control Z is really handy. If you're typing something and you make a mistake, or if you hit something with the mouse with your right hand, you can hit Control Z with your left hand and undo it. And that's a big time saver. And then redo is Y. Y is, I don't know why they use Y. It's right in the middle of the keyboard, maybe because it's far away. You don't hit it by accident. Cut, copy, and paste, I talked about. Control X, V, C, and V. Control A is select all. And there's S and P are save and print. And there's a whole other slew of them here. The home button, there's a home and end buttons in the middle of between the number pad and the main keyboard on most keyboards nowadays. Help you to move to the beginning or end of the line or the document. Control F lets you find something that's useful also on websites. Really useful. Control H includes the replace option, which is there. And then the Shift F3 is a three-way toggle button, which can change things to uppercase, all lowercase, or just the first letter capitalized. And I'm going to jump over to my document to demonstrate that. So let's say I take my title, I do Shift F3, it changes it automatically to all caps. Shift F3 again, changes it to all lowercase. Shift F3 the third time does it every word capitalized. So I can just keep hitting holding down the shift, I keep hitting F3 and it cycles through those 3 options. So I'll just keep it. I like it just the first letter capitalized. And my document looks good. Are there any questions? Cindy suggests that to remember Control V as paste, think of the V as the top of the glue bottle. That's handy. That makes a lot of sense. Also, it's right next to the C because you're always going to be pasting if you're copying. But it's the top of the glue stick bottle. That works. Great. Please take a moment to fill out our survey. Give us a call if you want some personalized help. We have a service called Book a Librarian, which is one-on-one computer or tech help. We help people all the time with their phones or tablets, computers, Microsoft Office programs, online difficulties. If you're having trouble with filing for unemployment, which so many people are these days, we've been helping a lot of people do that, navigate that nightmare of a scenario, trying to get past unemployment for some people. There was a ton of fraud involved last year, and those have been really helpful. This is a good option if you're in that situation. Just give us a call and set up an appointment with one of us. Just ask for a tech trainer or say you want to schedule a Book a Librarian. And then Ken and my emails are also listed here if you would like to send us an email. Thanks for tuning in. This lesson will be posted on our YouTube page. The library's YouTube page. We have been recording a lot of the presentations. You can find a lot of them there. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.